So hello fellow Earthlings. This is Earthling 6455463728. And did Hong Kong residents with their protests, did they just not know when to walk away? Did they just end up pushing their luck too far? And is this something that most of us end up doing? If we look at Hong Kong, we see that because of the initial protests, they got the person in charge of Hong Kong to rescind a law that they didn't like, that they felt gave too much power to China, to make China a little bit more responsible or a little bit more in charge than they would have liked. And because of the protests, they were able to do that. So they continued protesting. Some of their demands seemed ridiculous, like independence, like asking the US to intervene. Even the coronavirus couldn't stop some of these protests. They just went on and on and on. And if we look at the closest thing similar to this, we can see the protests in France. Their president, or their president, I believe, he wanted to put in place certain measures, so they protested. These people were called the Yellow Jackets, and no matter what he did, the protests just went on and on and on. And, even now, we can see protests that started as a result of George Floyd's death, some Black Lives Matter protests in Portland, Oregon, I believe. They just seem to be going on and on and on. And what they want to achieve out of the protests seems to have disappeared. Of course, a lot of people are out of work, so we can understand that that's why these things might happen, because people have a lot of time on their hands, and even when there was looting and people were burning down stuff, we could see that even though things were changing, the NASCAR decided that they were going to ban the Confederate flag at their events. There are some of these statues of different people that were taken down. These army bases in the US, they have probably going to change their names. There's certain protests that are going on and on and on. If I reach back in time and I think about the Arab Spring, some of those protests seem to just go on and on and on. And I think it's because there was no stopping condition. There was nothing big enough to draw a line in the sand and say, we're done, we're finished. If you look at the French revolutions, you can see something similar. There was the first revolution, the second revolution, the third. I don't know how many different revolutions they had in France. If you look at the way that borders are drawn, they're often drawn by things that are difficult to pass, that make people tired just to look at them, and they say, okay, we're not going to go any further. Like a river, a huge river, or a mountain, or something else that just forces us to stop. If we look at how we breed in terms of multiply, animals usually just keep multiplying until there's some kind of a famine because food runs out. If you look at even Alexander the Great, apparently he just kept going on and on and on until he came to a river and his men said, "We're done. We are not going to follow you any further." And that's exactly what happened. That's where he had to stop. And it wasn't like he went back to consolidate the returns that he had made. So, great. He had this great empire. He was Alexander the Great. And his empire, it collapsed as soon as he was dead because it was too big to be stable. He didn't have anything propping it up. If we see, like, as we age, when we're a kid, we're consuming a certain amount of calories, but that's because we're growing. We're becoming bigger. We have more teeth. Our bones are bigger. They're thicker. But in many instances, because life has been good to us, our waistlines start to grow and grow and grow. And by and large, we tend, especially in this day and age when things are good and we don't have a limit to the amount of food that we have, we don't have as many diseases to prevent us from eating and making us lose our appetite. We just keep going, until we hit a wall, until we hit something that makes us stop. And this is in spite of all of our intelligence. We can do calculations that lead us to understand the basis of the entire universe. But we can't recognize that we need to stop eating the bag of Doritos before it's empty. We just keep eating and eating and eating until when we go to the bottom of the bag and there's nothing, that's our stopping condition. The bottom of the bag or the bottom of the bowl, or there's no more in the fridge, in the box. And it is really difficult to control ourselves, even as individuals, far less as these Hong Kong protests that caused this situation to occur. The Hong Kongers, I think, I would never want to be in this situation. It's a tough spot to be in, where suddenly to go from one of the most free parts of China, I guess I can't call them mainland China, to being, repressed, just like any other part of China. It is, it's a huge blow to, everybody seems to be in despair. The people that, the articles that I take a look at and see, some people seem to hope that this is just, a short period of time and the law that was put in place to deal with the protests will be lifted. But I don't think so. That doesn't make sense. You don't roll back control that you have. So this is probably the new normal for China, for Hong Kong. And eventually, I presume that the Hong Kong people will simply adapt to this and their depression may pass. But if we take a look at what could have been the case if they had simply, assessed what they'd achieved as a result of the protests and realistically looked at to what they could expect to achieve going forward, they could have been in a much better situation than they are today. They might have been able to preserve the state that they were in for a very long time, maybe even longer than China had planned, to allow that state of circumstances to be in. But unfortunately, the initial success seemed to drive an insatiable desire for freedom, which is not wrong. It's just, it was never realistic. If you look at what what has happened in Catalonia, Spain, they wanted to get their independence. Did that actually happen? I mean, I have to look and see. The last place where that happened, where a country was able to divide itself recently, was North and South Sudan, I think it was. But that situation was pretty different, if I recall. I remember looking at a YouTube video that was implying that there was a difference of religion, for example, between the North and South of Sudan. And that was as a result of some geographic features that were in Sudan. So basically, there was already a built-in dotted line, where you can tear here on the dotted line kind of situation. Whereas that was never going to happen for Hong Kong. But it seems like we always, as human beings, and not even just as human beings, as living things, we don't know when to quit. We don't know how to quit when we're ahead. And, it reminds me of this story that I looked at recently, which says that conscientious people live the longest. People who stick to their rules, not necessarily the rules, but their rules. Like they're early, like they make sure to take care of themselves, to eat right, to exercise, to do what is asked of them, or to do what they promise to do. These people seem to live the longest. And it's not much of a surprise, because they have an internal control that they can use. They're not waiting for their fingers to come up with air to stop eating Doritos or popcorn, or they're not waiting until they're completely weakened, so they as a sign to stop going forward. They have their own internal controls to help them to navigate the world, and they probably live even healthier lives, not just longer. So that's something to consider. We probably need to be more like that, but that is going to take a tremendous amount of training. I don't know how we achieve that on our own. Well, it's not on our own, Every situation programs the individual or the organism. So anyway, guys, you can wish me luck. That's LUC. You can like, unlike, or comment. You can subscribe or share if you like, but I don't think it matters as much. But of course, I won't like it. It'll make me sad. But you can do nothing. Peace.